Sarah and Michael were the perfect couple, admired by everyone for their thriving wedding photography business and seemingly unbreakable bond. But when Sarah vanished without a trace one rainy night, the truth hidden behind Michael's camera lens shattered their flawless image forever. What investigators uncovered next would reveal a darkness no one could have imagined, and one devastating lie that destroyed everything. Sarah and Michael Bennett were the kind of couple people admired. Living in the peaceful town of Silver Falls, Oregon, they had built a life that looked like something out of a magazine. Their photography business, Ever After Moments, specialized in wedding portraits, and they quickly became one of the most sought-after teams in the Pacific Northwest. Clients praised not just their artistic talent, but the warmth and connection they brought to every shoot. They were known for capturing candid glances, quiet tears, laughter shared between newlyweds. People said they didn't just take pictures, they told stories. From the outside, their marriage seemed just as picture-perfect. Sarah, with her calm presence and sharp eye for detail, handled the editing and client communication. Michael, confident and charming, was the one behind the camera. They worked in sync, anticipating each other's moves during shoots, finishing each other's sentences. On Instagram, they shared behind-the-scenes clips of wedding setups, road trips to destination shoots, and cozy evenings editing photos together. Their online presence was filled with sunlit images, romantic quotes, and smiling faces. Hundreds of followers commented regularly, calling them couple goals, and asking for advice on building a business with a spouse. Locally, they were beloved. They attended community events, sponsored local art shows, and even offered free mini-sessions to engaged couples who couldn't afford professional photos. Clients returned years later with babies and toddlers, trusting Sarah and Michael to document each new chapter. To many, they represented something rare, a couple who not only worked and lived together, but did so with what appeared to be deep respect and love. Their home, a charming craftsman-style house with a wraparound porch, was often described as welcoming and full of life. Friends who visited remembered the smell of coffee, the sound of soft music playing while Sarah edited photos, and walls lined with framed prints from their travels. The couple didn't have children, but they had a rescue dog named Bella, who frequently appeared in their online content, curled up in Sarah's lap or trotting beside Michael on hikes. But for all the warmth and beauty they projected, there were parts of their lives no one really saw. Sarah's friends occasionally noticed moments when she seemed distracted, even anxious. At times she would disappear mid-conversation, her eyes flicking toward her phone or a nearby window. She always smiled and brushed it off, saying she was just tired or had editing deadlines to meet. Michael, on the other hand, was harder to read. He was charismatic, the type who could win people over quickly, but some people mentioned feeling a strange intensity behind his charm. It was subtle, nothing you could point to directly, but enough to make a few acquaintances feel uneasy around him. Still, none of those quiet observations added up to anything concrete. Everyone has stress, everyone has quirks, and in a small town like Silver Falls, people were more inclined to assume the best. So the Bennetts remained a golden couple, untouchable in their shared success and seemingly unwavering devotion. Their business continued to thrive, and they booked weddings into the next year with ease. If there were cracks in their perfect image, no one saw them. If Sarah ever questioned her husband's past, she kept those doubts to herself. Their life looked like a dream, and they worked hard to keep it that way. No one could have predicted that behind their stunning photographs and heartfelt social media posts, a much darker narrative was beginning to unfold, and when the truth finally came to light, it would leave a trail of devastation no camera could ever capture. The rain started that Thursday afternoon, soft at first, then heavier as night fell over Silver Falls. By the time darkness settled in, the streets were slick with water, reflecting the glow of traffic lights and storefront signs. It was the kind of gloomy evening that made people stay indoors, wrapped in blankets, waiting for the storm to pass. Sarah Bennett, known for being dependable and always on schedule, had planned to meet a potential client at a local cafe. She never showed up. At first, no one panicked. Maybe she'd forgotten. Maybe the meeting had been rescheduled. But as the hours passed and no one could reach her, concern quickly turned to fear. Her phone went straight to voicemail. She hadn't answered any texts. When Michael called the police late that night, he sounded calm but concerned. He explained that Sarah had gone out earlier and hadn't returned. He said it wasn't completely unusual. Sometimes she liked to drive or walk to clear her mind. She could be impulsive like that, especially when she felt overwhelmed by work. But even he admitted it was unlike her to be gone this long without checking in. The next morning, police found Sarah's car parked just outside the Bennett's photography studio, a converted brick building located on the edge of downtown. The car was locked, her purse still inside. So were her keys and her phone tucked neatly into the center console. There were no signs of struggle in or around the vehicle. No blood, no broken glass. The studio was also locked from the inside, with no evidence of forced entry. A cup of tea, cold now, sat on a small table near the editing desk. Her camera was still on its tripod, as if she had been working earlier in the day. To investigators, it was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The initial search focused on nearby areas, trails, alleys, riverbanks, places where someone might go to be alone, or more grimly where someone might be taken. Volunteers from the town showed up to help, forming search parties and handing out flyers with Sarah's photo. The image was one she'd taken herself, smiling slightly, her hazel eyes focused directly into the lens, hair tucked behind one ear. It was the kind of picture people stared at longer than they meant to, trying to see some clue in her expression. Michael cooperated with police, but remained emotionally distant. He answered questions, provided Sarah's calendar and recent client information, but didn't seem shaken. When asked about their relationship, he described it as solid but admitted Sarah had been acting differently over the past few weeks. More withdrawn, more distracted. He said he thought she might be going through something privately, maybe even planning to leave for a while. But Sarah's friends pushed back hard against that idea. She had just made dinner plans for the weekend. She was in the middle of editing 3 wedding sessions. She'd ordered a new lens that was scheduled to arrive the day after she disappeared. More tellingly, she had been planning a surprise trip for their anniversary, something she had mentioned excitedly to a close friend just days earlier. As the search dragged on with no sign of her, suspicion began to build. People who once admired the Bennetts now whispered to each other in quiet conversations at grocery stores and coffee shops. Something didn't feel right. A woman like Sarah doesn't just disappear without a trace. And while Michael continued working at the studio, showing no visible signs of grief, detectives started to dig deeper, not just into Sarah's life, but into his. Because when a seemingly perfect life begins to unravel, the truth is often hidden in plain sight. 2 days after Sarah's disappearance, detectives returned to the Bennett's photography studio with a warrant. The first search had turned up nothing unusual, but investigators were now working under a different assumption. This wasn't just a missing person case. It was starting to look like something far more serious. The quiet, brick studio that had once been filled with laughter and wedding portraits was now a potential crime scene. The inside was pristine, organized, almost too neat. Wedding albums lined the shelves in perfect order, camera equipment was stored carefully in labeled drawers, and framed prints decorated the walls, images of happy couples, dramatic backdrops, and glowing sunlight. But the atmosphere had shifted. What once felt warm and welcoming now seemed cold and still, like a stage waiting for a performance that would never begin again. Detectives moved slowly, documenting everything. On the surface it was all exactly what you'd expect from a photography business. They found booking calendars, payment records, client contracts, memory cards, and hard drives, all standard. But in the corner of the editing room, inside a locked drawer built into an antique wooden desk, they discovered something unexpected, a small unlabeled external hard drive. Michael, when asked about it, claimed it was a backup drive. He said he had forgotten it was even there. He also said he couldn't remember the password. That struck investigators as odd. Michael was known for being meticulous with his work. Forgetting a backup drive, or not knowing how to access it, didn't fit with how he ran the business. But without a clear reason to detain him, police had to let him go for the time being. The hard drive was sent to a digital forensics lab for analysis. Back at the studio, a second look at the layout raised more questions. Detectives noticed that despite the large windows and open floor plan, certain parts of the space had no clear purpose. One storage closet had a lock on the inside. There was also a strange discrepancy in the floor plan. A space that should have connected to a back utility area had been sealed off, but without probable cause to break through walls. Those discoveries were noted but left untouched for now. As investigators combed through the studio's contents, they began to build a profile of Michael and Sarah's life behind the scenes. On paper, everything appeared normal. Their business was thriving, there were no financial issues, no signs of domestic conflict. Michael's alibi for the night of Sarah's disappearance was that he had been home editing photos and watching a documentary, alone. No one could confirm it. Michael didn't act like a man grieving a missing wife. He returned to the studio briefly that week, claimed he wanted to keep working to stay focused, but he avoided the press, declined interviews, and didn't join the public search efforts. That absence didn't go unnoticed. Sarah's friends were furious. Online speculation was growing. Rumors spread on social media. Some people insisted Michael was innocent. Others were convinced he knew more than he was letting on. When the forensics team finally cracked the encrypted hard drive, a few days later, what they found changed everything. Among the standard wedding photo files was a hidden folder. Inside were images that were not related to any client, wedding or promotional shoot. They were unlike anything anyone had expected. Black and white photos, carefully lit, chillingly composed. Women, motionless, posed in unnatural ways, draped over furniture, lying in fields, floating in shallow water. At first it was hard to tell if they were real or staged, but one detail made investigators stop cold. One of the photos matched the scene of an unsolved murder from 2 years earlier, just one town over, and suddenly, the mystery of Sarah Bennett's disappearance became something far more sinister. The hard drive, once just a curious piece of forgotten equipment, had become the center of the investigation. Its hidden folder contained dozens of images, each more unsettling than the last. At first glance, the photographs could be mistaken for art, shot in black and white with sharp focus, moody lighting, and haunting composition. But as investigators scrolled through them, a horrifying pattern began to emerge. These were not styled portraits or creative experiments. They were simulations of death. Each image featured a woman. None of them were identified, but they all shared something in common. Their bodies were eerily still, their eyes closed or vacant, their limbs arranged in strange, deliberate poses. Some appeared to be lying in natural outdoor settings, tall grass, dried riverbeds, or forest clearings, while others were indoors, staged against minimal backdrops like abandoned furniture, tattered curtains or bare walls. The attention to detail was precise. The light sources, the angles, even the shadows had all been meticulously crafted to create an atmosphere of silence and finality. Investigators initially wondered if the scenes were staged with models. Maybe Michael had been working on a dark, private photography project. But then came the photo that changed everything. It matched a real crime scene, a 2019 murder case, from a neighboring county where a woman had been found near an abandoned farmhouse. Her body had been posed in a fetal position, her hand resting on a rusted bucket. At the time, the case had gone cold, but one of the detectives reviewing the hard drive had worked that investigation and recognized the bucket immediately. In the photo on the hard drive, the same scene was recreated with chilling accuracy, down to the angle of the victim's chin and the dirt smeared across her feet. More comparisons followed. Another photo matched a 2021 murder where the victim had been discovered in a shallow creek, draped in torn white fabric. The crime scene had been classified as ritualistic because of how deliberately the body was arranged. And there it was again, on the hard drive, in stark black and white, frozen in time. With each matching photo, the case against Michael grew more alarming. These weren't random images, they were either photographs taken at real murder scenes, or they were painstaking recreations based on them. But how had he captured such specific details? These crime scenes had never been made public in such depth. The only way to replicate them this accurately would be to either be there when the crime happened, or to be the one who staged the scene in the first place. Detectives worked backward, compiling a list of all the unsolved murders in a 100-mile radius over the last 6 years. They cross-referenced dates, locations and victims with the timestamps and geodata hidden in the image files. The results were terrifying. At least 5 photos matched real cases. In 2 of those, Michael had been in the area supposedly traveling for photography consultation. He had no bookings to prove it, no receipts, no records of the clients he claimed to meet. As more images were analyzed, investigators noticed small background details that added even more weight to their suspicions. In one photo, a familiar piece of fabric appeared, identical to a backdrop used in the Bennett's studio. In another, a prop lantern that Michael had posted about years earlier on his business's blog made a quiet appearance, sitting beside a lifeless hand. At that point, detectives weren't just investigating Sarah's disappearance. They were looking at a potential serial predator who had hidden in plain sight for years, and though no image on the hard drive showed Sarah directly, her absence now loomed larger than ever. Because if these were records of what had already happened, the question no one wanted to ask was becoming impossible to ignore. Was Sarah the next scene waiting to be captured? The hard drive had opened the door to something far darker than anyone had anticipated. As investigators worked through its contents, it became clear that the photographs weren't just artful recreations or twisted projects. They were evident. The exactness of each pose, the location details, and the physical characteristics of the women captured in the images matched known, unsolved murder cases. Across several counties, one by one, police departments began comparing their cold cases to the disturbing photograph. It didn't take long for a pattern to emerge. The victims all fit a certain profile: women in their 20s or early 30s, often with dark hair, found alone in remote areas. In total, 5 murder cases now shared undeniable similarities with the images on Michael Bennett's hard drive. The women had been discovered in different towns, at different times, but each body had been posed in a deliberate, almost ceremonial way. At the time of each investigation, police had considered the positioning strange, but had no evidence to support any kind of connection between the case. Now they had their missing link. The timeline was just as chilling. The earliest photo matched a murder from 6 years earlier, long before Michael and Sarah had become local celebrities with their wedding photography business. At that point they had just moved to Silver Falls, and their studio was still in the early stages. According to records, Michael had briefly studied photography at an art institute on the East Coast, but he had dropped out after less than a year. There was little documentation about that time in his life. He had told Sarah and others that he left school because it was too rigid, but now investigators were wondering if there had been another reason, something darker that had gone unreported. Even more disturbing were Michael's unexplained trips. Over the last several years, he had frequently traveled to towns where the murders occurred, always claiming he was scouting new wedding venues or meeting with potential clients, but no emails, contracts or receipts backed up those claims. In one case, a hotel confirmed he had stayed there on the same weekend a woman had gone missing. He had checked in alone and paid in cash. Investigators also took a closer look at his online behavior. On photography forums, under a username later traced to Michael, someone had shared cryptic posts about capturing vulnerability and the moment when a subject gives in to stillness. One post even referenced death as the truest silence to photograph, a sentence that now sent chills through those reading it in hindsight. Yet despite all this, none of it directly tied him to a crime. The images were disturbing, the patterns deeply suspicious, but they weren't enough to arrest him, not yet. There was no blood, no weapons, no bodies with his fingerprints on them. What they had was a series of eerie photographs, travel history that aligned too closely with the crimes, and a man whose public life had been carefully curated to seem completely normal. But then the focus shifted back to Sarah. In the days before she vanished, she had been behaving different. According to her best friend, she had grown distant and preoccupied. She'd even mentioned that she had found something in the studio she didn't understand, something that scared her. She hadn't gone into detail. Her friend assumed it was just stress or maybe something related to work. But now police believed Sarah had seen the photos. Maybe she'd found the hard drive. Maybe she had started asking questions. And if Michael had gone to such lengths to keep his secret hidden for so many years, what would he do if someone got too close? The photos on the hard drive were no longer just about solving old cases. They were clues to something more urgent. Sarah Bennett might not just be a missing person. She might be the only one who had uncovered the truth, and the final piece of a horrifying puzzle. The deeper investigators dug into Michael Bennett's past, the more cracks they uncovered in the carefully built image he had maintained for years. He had always been seen as polished, creative and soft-spoken, someone who spoke with confidence but rarely revealed much about himself. He was the kind of man people found easy to trust, but beneath the surface, there were missing pieces, and once detectives started pulling them apart, a different picture began to form.
Michael had grown up in a suburb outside Philadelphia. His early life was mostly unremarkable. Average grades, quiet demeanor, no criminal record, but after high school he enrolled in a small arts college, known for its photography program. There he showed talent but was described by peers as obsessive and isolated. He often worked late into the night, creating dark, moody compositions that disturbed some of his instructors. One of his professors interviewed years later remembered a final project Michael had submitted, series of staged photographs that portrayed scenes of loneliness and death, using mannequins and lighting to mimic real life with unnerving accuracy. Halfway through his second semester, Michael abruptly dropped out. School records didn't offer a reason, and there was no record of any disciplinary action. He simply stopped attending classes and disappeared from campus. That gap in his life, nearly a year long, was one Sarah had never questioned. When they met a few years later at a photography workshop in Portland, he told her he had left school because it didn't challenge him. She never pressed for more detail. Once married, Michael moved with Sarah to Silver Falls and quickly helped turn their wedding photography business into a local success. He seemed devoted to the craft. He was present, driven, and focused. But behind the scenes he continued taking solo trips, days or sometimes a week at a time, often to rural towns, claiming he was exploring new venues or shooting landscapes for their portfolio. These trips usually happened during off-season months when they had fewer weddings booked. Sarah had mentioned them in passing to friends, saying Michael enjoyed being alone with his camera. She never voiced concern, but in hindsight, those trips now lined up too closely with dates of the murder. As part of the expanding investigation, detectives reviewed Michael's personal archives, his computer, his cloud storage, even his old external drives. Most of the files were wedding-related, but a few stood out. There were folders labeled with vague titles like Studies, Atmosphere and Stillness. Inside were experimental photos, shots of abandoned buildings, empty fields, old farmhouses, locations later identified as places where victims had been found. Some of the photos dated back 5 or 6 years, others were more recent. Even more unsettling were Michael's notebooks, recovered from a drawer in his home office. The journals were filled with entries that read more like storyboards than personal reflection. They included sketches of scene ideas, notes on lighting angles, and words like serenity, control, and final moments scribbled in the margins. One page simply had a name written on it, Sarah, and next to it, the phrase "no turning back." By now, detectives were convinced that Sarah had discovered part of this hidden world. Perhaps she had found one of the folders. Perhaps she had read his notes. Whatever she had seen, it must have been terrifying, enough to make her confront him, or perhaps threaten to expose. But there were still no signs of her, no body, no physical evidence of a struggle, no message sent in secret, just absence. Michael continued to claim innocence. He denied any connection to the murders and insisted the photos were theoretical art, inspired by true crime stories, not real events. But with each new discovery, his story made less sense. What started as a search for a missing...
After the discovery in the forest, investigators returned to the Bennett's studio with renewed urgency. The shallow grave, the matching backdrop, the broken lens, every piece pointed to one person. But what remained unanswered was what had happened to Sarah. They still had no body, no crime scene, no clear trace of her fate. It was time to search the studio again, this time with cadaver dogs and structural experts. They were no longer looking for general clues. They were looking for evidence of concealment. False walls, hidden rooms, buried secrets. The building, once a warm and creative space filled with light and laughter, now felt claustrophobic and cold. Investigators swept the ground floor, checking for inconsistencies, but it wasn't until they reached the basement that things began to unravel. The basement was unfinished, mostly used for storage, old props, boxes of unused prints, some lighting equipment. But one section of the wall raised suspicion. It didn't line up with the building's architectural blueprint. A measuring tool confirmed that the wall was thicker than it should have been. Behind it, there was empty space. They drilled carefully, breaking through the dry wall to reveal a small concealed room no larger than a walk-in closet. It had no windows and was soundproofed with padded foam along the walls. Inside was a disturbing collection of items, several mannequins positioned in various poses, photography lights on rolling stands and a camera tripod set up in the center. Around the room were shelves stacked with props, vintage dresses, lace veils, plastic flower petals, old picture frames, and worn-out shoes. There were notes taped to the wall detailing scene ideas, many crossed out or annotated. One note was dated 3 days before Sarah disappeared. It read, "Rain, fabric, floor, stillness, eyes closed." There was no sign of blood or struggle, no physical evidence tying Sarah directly to the room, but everything inside screamed preparation. This was a staging area, designed not for clients or creative experimentation, but for something else entirely, a place where someone could plan, arrange, and control every detail of a scene, a room where silence reigned. Most chilling of all was a large framed sketch, pinned to the far wall. It depicted a woman curled on the floor, covered in a sheer sheet, her arms folded inward. The drawing was faint, but the resemblance to Sarah was undeniable. Her hairstyle, her build, even the slight tilt of her head. Investigators couldn't ignore the implication. The sketch had been made before her disappearance. It wasn't just a plan, it might have been a rehearsal. As forensic teams processed the space, they uncovered a camera memory card hidden beneath the floorboard. It had been removed from a DSLR model Michael once used but claimed to have sold years ago. When the files were recovered, they found several test shots of the mannequins positioned exactly like the bodies in the hard drive photographs. One sequence of images stood out. The lighting was different, and the subject wasn't a mannequin. The face was turned away, obscured by hair, but investigators believed it might be Sarah. The date on the files matched the day she disappeared. But the images stopped abruptly. No clear photo confirmed her identity. No movement, no sequence of events, just a single haunting stillness, as if the subject had never moved again. With the hidden room exposed, detectives now had mounting physical evidence. The hard drive, the grave, the matching props, the memory card, the sketch, all of it painted a picture more terrifying than anyone had imagined. Michael had been preparing for this moment, perhaps for years. Whether Sarah had discovered his secret and confronted him, or whether she had simply been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, remained unknown. But now the perfect studio had revealed its purpose. It wasn't just a place of creativity, it was a stage, and Sarah had become the final scene. With the secret room uncovered, and the chilling evidence piling up, the investigation entered a new phase. Authorities intensified their scrutiny of Michael Bennett, determined to unravel every detail of his double life. They issued warrants to access his financial records, phone logs, and personal communications, hoping to find clues that could explain how far his obsession had gone and, crucially, where Sarah was now. Michael's bank statements revealed something curious: unexplained cash withdrawals, totaling thousands of dollars, spread out over several months. The timing matched his solo trips, but no records showed what the money was used for. Surveillance footage from nearby towns showed Michael driving alone during some of these excursions, often late at night or early in the morning. On a few occasions, he stopped at hardware stores and gas stations in remote areas, places close to where some of the victims had been found. When police examined his phone records, they found deleted messages that had been partially recovered by digital forensics experts. The texts, though fragmented, hinted at paranoia and fear. Phrases like "can't trust anyone," "she knows too much," and "need to stay ahead," painted a portrait of a man unraveled. A contact saved under a pseudonym, L, sent warnings and cryptic advice about staying quiet, but no one could identify who L was or if the person was real. A breakthrough came when investigators analyzed Michael's social media activity. Public posts were polished and professional, but private messages revealed a darker side. He had been exchanging messages with a small online community fascinated by true crime, dark art, and crime scene photography. The tone of some conversations suggested that Michael wasn't just an observer. He had detailed knowledge about unsolved cases and specific details that hadn't been released to the public. Detectives reached out to the administrators of the forums and discovered that Michael had used multiple aliases over the years to conceal his identity. In some chats, he boasted about creating living art and spoke cryptically about capturing the essence of silence. Users thought he was eccentric, but never suspected the truth behind his words. Meanwhile, the search for Sarah intensified. Police coordinated with search teams and volunteers to scour wooded areas, abandoned properties and hidden spots around Silver Falls and nearby counties. Canine units were deployed to track her scent, but no definitive trail emerged. The uncertainty gnawed at everyone involved. Back at the studio, a more personal side of the case emerged. Friends and family spoke of Sarah's growing anxiety in the weeks before she vanished. She had confided in a close friend that she felt like she was living a lie, and had seen something she shouldn't have. Those words took on new meaning, as the investigation revealed the horrifying secret Michael had been hiding. The pressure mounted on Mike. Though he maintained his innocence publicly, his demeanor grew increasingly withdrawn. Investigators noticed changes during questioning. He avoided eye contact, gave vague answers and sometimes seemed distracted or agitated. In one recorded interview, when asked directly about the photographs, he claimed they were artistic experiments, and denied any involvement in the murders. But the mounting evidence told a different story. Police were now convinced that Michael's obsession with death and control had escalated into a pattern of violent behavior. The photos on the hard drive were not just recreations, they were trophies. Each image marked a real victim, a life ended and frozen forever in his camera's frame. Despite the chilling discoveries, one question remained unanswered. Where was Sarah? Had she been killed and hidden, or was she still alive somewhere, trapped and waiting for rescue? The search stretched on, every day feeling heavier than the last. The investigation was no longer just about uncovering the truth. It was a race against time to find Sarah, and bring an end to a nightmare that had shattered a perfect marriage, exposing a darkness no one had ever imagined. Months passed since Sarah's disappearance, and the case had grown colder with every unanswered question. The community that once admired the Bennetts for their artistry and charm was now fractured by fear and suspicion. Michael Bennett remained in custody, his silence and cryptic behavior only fueling speculation, but the breakthrough came unexpectedly, and it came from a place no one had thought to look. A forensic analyst reviewing the hard drive's metadata discovered a hidden folder, cleverly encrypted and masked by layers of digital camouflage. It took weeks of decryption efforts, but when the files finally opened, they revealed a chilling new set of photographs, and a video. The photographs were unlike any seen before. They depicted Sarah, alive but restrained in various poses inside a dimly lit room. The images were raw and personal, capturing moments of fear, vulnerability, and desperation. Each photo was dated, spanning several days after her official disappearance. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. Sarah had been held captive and the photos were proof. The video was even more disturbing. It was shaky and grainy, shot from a low angle as if the camera was hidden. The footage showed Sarah being led into a room, the door closing behind her with a soft click. Her voice was barely audible, whispering pleas for help. The last frames showed a figure, dark, indistinct, moving toward the camera before the video abruptly ended. Investigators analyzed the video for clues. The room's details, peeling wallpaper, a cracked window, faded furniture, matched an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of Silver Falls. A search team was immediately dispatched. The farmhouse was a ruin of its former self, overgrown with weeds and partially collapsed. Inside, searchers found signs of recent habitation, discarded food wrappers, makeshift bedding, and personal items that belonged to Sarah. There was no sign of Michael, but traces of his presence were undeniable. A camera tripod stood in one corner, and on the walls were faint outlines where photographs had once been hung. Further exploration revealed a hidden crawl space beneath the floorboard. It was small and cramped, clearly used for concealment. Inside, police found a collection of notebooks and journals belonging to Michael, filled with rambling entries about control, silence, and perfection. Among the pages were detailed plans for new photo shoots, this time featuring Sarah. The evidence painted a horrific picture. Sarah had been taken, held captive and forced to participate in Michael's twisted obsession. Her disappearance was not random, but a calculated part of a long dark pattern. But Michael was nowhere to be found. A nationwide manhunt began. Authorities feared he might try to flee the state or even disappear entirely. Public alerts were issued, describing him and warning the community to stay vigilant. Meanwhile, the search for Sarah's rescue became a race against time. In the days that followed, As the manhunt intensified, an anonymous tip came in. A call from a distant state reported a suspicious man, matching Michael's description seen near a remote cabin. Police coordinated with local authorities, setting up surveillance and preparing to move in. But before they could act, Michael vanished again, this time leaving behind a single chilling message. It was a letter addressed to Sarah, left behind in the abandoned farmhouse. In it he confessed to everything: the murders, the photos, the obsession that had consumed him. He claimed he loved Sarah more than anyone, and that his actions were his way of preserving the perfect moment. The letter ended with a haunting line: "One day you will understand. The case remains open, and the community waits anxiously for answers. Sarah's fate is still unknown." Michael Bennett, once admired and trusted, is now a fugitive, his true self finally revealed as a monster hiding behind a perfect marriage. The story of Sarah and Michael is a grim reminder that sometimes the most dangerous secrets lie hidden beneath the surface, and one lie, no matter how carefully constructed, can destroy everything.